Chapter 18. Standing in the doorway, limed in light, stood a serene lady in a gauzy blue wizard's robe, adorned with moons and stars. In one hand she held a staff tipped in crystal. She was tall, taller than Gav. Her hair was silver, and she had laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, and her pointed hat tip folded over just enough to be endearing. An elderly owl perched on one shoulder. Gav had no memories whatsoever of her, but felt confident that he could make a guess at this point. "Arthano," Zarakonar growled. Somehow, being proven right did not give Gav much in the way of comfort. "Zarakonar," Arthano said. The white wizard shook her head sadly. "Was it not enough to take the lives of those shining young heroes? Must you plunge the world into a greater darkness?" Zarakonar threw his head back and laughed. Alicia's head was held painfully upright by Zarakonar's grasp on her hair, but her fingers continued to move. The other three wizards dared not stir from their designated spots. Even Zaxus stayed on his mark, kneeling with his useless arm cradled in his lap. They didn't know what happened next in the spell. Moving might well be a death sentence. Arthano had no such fears. She strode into the room, her staff blazing. "I am here to finally bring an end to your reign of terror." Zarakonar just laughed again. Arthano waved her hands, and a torrent of light burst from her staff. It splashed against the barrier, showering sparks in every direction. Zarakonar tossed a bolt that only shimmered as it crossed the barrier. Arthano batted it aside to slam into the wall, leaving a smoking crater the size of Gav's head. A sliver of light from the next room over shone through the cracks in the wall. The owl flung itself from Arthano's shoulder. It arced upward towards the ceiling and then plummeted down. Distracted by the light show in front of him, Gav didn't realize it was aiming itself for him until the bird had nearly reached him. He looked up to see a mess of talons coming straight at his face. He tried to bring his arms up to defend himself, knowing it was too late. The last thing he was going to see was going to be feathers and blood. He heard his own shriek, embarrassingly high. Alicia's fireball slammed into the owl, sending it sizzling off into a corner. Gav glanced across the raging wizard duel in the middle of the room, shocked that Alicia had defended him. Alicia looked more than a little shocked herself. Zarakonar glared down at her and made a gesture. A bubble of sickly light encased her hands. She screamed in pain. Gav felt like he had been gut-punched. She had one shot, and she had used it to save him. Arthano's face twisted in anguish at the death of the bird. "This ends here! This ends now!" "Wait!" Gav cried, extending an arm to ward her off. Too late. Another young hero burst into the room, following his mentor. Valvina brought her hands up, flinging darts of sizzling blackness at the newcomer. He ducked and rolled. The white wizard walked straight towards the circle, arm extended. The newcomer slammed his back into Arthano's knees. She stumbled forward, her arm lurching into the circle. Her hand, staff and all, disappeared. Whatever Arthano had expected, it hadn't been that. She stared at the stump, too surprised to even cry out. Which was when Zaxus's unnamed paramour stepped up behind her. She opened her mouth, unhinged her jaw, and as the shocked wizard looked back up, Valvina's next bolt nearly dispatched Arthano's companion. The air of the room began to stir. A stub of chalk skittered towards the diagram, banging against Gav's ankle. Arthano's eyes glowed. A pinhole in reality was beginning to open above Zarakonar's head. The white wizard's remaining fist clenched, gathering lightnings to unleash on all within the room. Zaxus's friend's tongue stabbed out, burying its tip deep in Arthano's back. She gave a choking little gasp, and for a moment everyone froze. The pinhole opened, partially by sacrifice. The pinhole opened partially by the sacrifice of 2 wizards' hands, whirled unevenly. A trickle of blood oozed out of the corner of Arthanos' mouth. Then Zaxxus's friend yanked her tongue back into her mouth and wrapped around something fist-sized and meaty. Gav fancied that it was still beating. Arthano collapsed to one knee, and then the other, and then sprawled face forward onto the ground, a ragged hole in her back. The victor chewed indecorously, her mouth too full to completely close. Blood ran down her chin. Zaxxus grinned weakly at her, and she grinned back, gristle showing through her teeth. Zarakonar laughed again, delighted at the sudden, ignominious death of his rival. The pinhole was beginning to pull objects towards it. Leftover papers flew and smacked into the barrier. Alicia's hair streamed upwards. The wind, unthwarted by the circle, whistled past Gav's ears. "How do we make it stop?" he yelled over the roar. "You can't," Zarakonar declared, raising one hand towards the rip. "The only way out now is to complete the spell." "It needs another hand?" Gav said, eyeing the remaining hand on Arthanos' corpse. A wizard's hand, Valvina said, looking revolted. 3 wizards' hands. This is the real reason you asked us, isn't it? "Do you really think me incapable of running a few minor errands myself?" Zarakonar said, his eyes narrowed with contempt. "Now, make your decision. We both know he's too weak to do it, but you could still be a queen." No one even looked at Gav. It might have been galling. It should have been galling. They knew that he was too much of a coward to actually shove his hand through himself, but he was glad. The rip was already tearing itself wider. How long before it started to do real damage? He looked around. Behind him, the mirror strained in its setting. The bag that he had forgotten to clear away was still behind it, but starting to loosen. He might be wrong. It was nothing but a gamble of half-remembered spell theory. He might lose everything. He didn't have a choice. He leaned over and snagged the corner of the bag in his right hand, loosening the knots as he went. He wouldn't get a second chance. Before he could lose his nerve, he thrust his left hand into the barrier. He had imagined it would hurt quite a bit. It was even worse than he had imagined. Even after the horrible burning sensation as his hand disintegrated, he could still feel the hand. It wasn't destroyed. It was somewhere else, and that somewhere else hurt like hell. He was screaming, not like a little girl as he'd feared, but more like a kid goat, which was even less dignified. Above them, the hole in reality stabilized and became a gate. Across the circle, he could see Alicia screaming at him, but he couldn't hear her words. Something about betrayal, he imagined. She would understand soon if he was right, or she wouldn't, and it wouldn't really matter. Something stepped through the gate. It was made of shadows and feathers and insatiable hunger. The eye couldn't quite focus on it. Man-shaped, he thought, but he wasn't entirely sure. His mind kept trying to build impressions of something solid and slipping. It had wings, claws, a fog of despair. It walked on talons, feet, jagged cracks in reality. Its face was dominated by eyes or mouthfuls of teeth. They flickered, but there was always too many of both. It wasn't all the way there. Like his hand, it was mostly somewhere else. Zarakonar's grin was a terrible thing to behold. He raised his hands in greeting to the great Terathax. The barrier stopped shimmering. Zarakonar was saying something, a negotiation. Gav was on his knees, he realized with some surprise. He needed to stand up. He had something important to do. What was it? Oh, shock. He recognized this. This is what shock felt like. It was very distracting, inconvenient. The being had asked a question. Reality rippled a bit, gaps opening and closing like mouths. Zarakonar raised the knife. It must be time for the final sacrifice. Oh, that was bad. Wait, Gav mumbled. Couldn't we use the brother? The great Terathax turned towards him questioningly. He shuddered under the gaze of a predator that wanted not just to rip the flesh from his bones, but the essence from his soul. Valvina, free of its gaze, snorted. Like a royal prince is likely to be a virgin. I'm not asking someone to die for me, Alicia declared. No one asked you, Zarakonar said, backhanding her cheek with the pommel of the dagger. It didn't have much force at that angle, but it was enough to whip her head around. He's on the wrong side of the barrier anyway, Valvina told Gav with a trace of pity that he hadn't expected. She wasn't asking him to die for her, but that's what she deserved. He had messed everything else in his life up. He had always done whatever he thought he had to do, and it had never brought him anything of worth. He still wanted to survive, but he wanted her to survive even more. He pulled himself to his feet. The bag wriggled, yanking him off balance. He tried to steady himself and received a thrash to his stump, which nearly brought him back to his knees. Zarakonar raised the dagger. Alicia closed her eyes. You shouldn't close your eyes while you're trying to read. It makes it hard to know where you're at. Gav staggered towards the boundary, moving far too slowly. This wasn't the plan, any of the plans. He thought he would be able to move faster than this. Heroes always seem to be able to move faster than this, even when grievously wounded. He should have known he was not supposed to be a hero. From under Alicia's black cloak rose a blazing, indignant, bedraggled feathers. Fiari couldn't fly, or he shouldn't have been able to. Somehow he clawed his way up the back of her robe, into her hair, and leapt, wings frantically beating the air. Zarakonar reared back, startled by the feathery assault, one arm already warding off his attacker. But that wasn't what Fiari had in mind. The rooster slammed himself onto the point of the dagger, impaling his own breast. He was so scrawny there wasn't much breast to impale. Zarakonar looked disgusted. He flicked the broken body from the knife. If the stabbing had not killed Fiari, the fall certainly did. Gav could hear the crack of the bird's neck as it hit the stone floor. Acceptable, the thought rolled across the room, hot and pleased, but with a hunger unblunted. Even Zarakonar paused, confused. Alicia stared, incredulous. Gav's brain fed him a series of unconnected thoughts that somehow added up to a bigger thought. The remarkable similarity in hair color between the princess's glamour, her brother, and the count. A certain something around their eyes. A memory of Alicia complaining about her father having at least 3 bastards that she knew about, and knowledge that she most likely did not know about all of them. A certain delight that despite the count's handsomeness, apparently any would-be conquests had been equally put off by his manner. A pity that he hadn't been able to summon for the man in real life. He wondered if Fiari had even known. Zarakonar shrugged, not fully understanding, but not willing to lose the opportunity. He turned his back to Gav to complete the bargain. Now was his chance. He might fail. He would probably die, but at least he would have tried. Gav staggered across the barrier, tuned to it as part of the spell now. It no longer kept him out. He had thought that it might work like that, and he had felt almost giddy with relief. He grabbed the edge of the bag and yanked it with his teeth. The contents lay in stunned silence at the sudden burst of light for just a moment. It was enough. He yanked the bag over Zarakonar's head. He had to lean close to bite the knot. Zarakonar smelled of dried blood and tar. Gav threw his head back, jerking the drawstring tight. The bag thrashed. Zarakonar howled and flailed frantically, clawing at the drawstring. Gav held the bag down with his good hand, wrapping his stump around Zarakonar's chest. Something in the bag punched him in the eye. He saw stars. He hung on. The thrashing was becoming more spasmodic. Liquids seeped down Zarakonar's robe. The other wizard was becoming heavier. The sounds had turned into incoherent moaning and a wet sucking and cracking noises. Zarakonar's knees gave out. Gav lowered them both to the floor. He held on to the bottom of the bag until the heartbeat finally stopped. That's a good spot to take a break.